There are peaceful Palestinians who have been caught up in the crosshairs of the demonic brainwashing of Hamas and Hezbollah, all of this backed by Iran and fueled monetarily by Qatar. Hi, thanks for dropping by. Bishop Robert Stearns with the weekly Israel Frontline update. I'm not in our normal studio today. We're traveling for our national conference, but I'm glad you dropped by. Every week, we bring you news and updates from Israel and issues surrounding Israel and the greater Middle East. So much of our world is focused on this really tiny piece of land that just in an outsized way demands global attention. It's really curious, isn't it? Israel is this tiny piece of land, smaller than the size of New Jersey. Half of it is a desert, and the Jewish people are a tiny group of people. 16 million Jews globally. This is a tiny group of people demographically, and yet so much global conversation in the news, in the media, social media, surrounds the question of Israel and the Jewish people. And so we seek to bring you perspective. I am not a politician, I'm not a governmental official, I'm not a journalist, I'm a pilgrim. I'm a Christian, I'm a follower of Jesus, and that journey with Jesus brought me to the land of his birth and brought me into a conversation and an understanding with that land and that people. That was 32 years ago, and that journey is still continuing today. So thank you for dropping by, and let's get into it today. So really alarming, July 2nd, a Massachusetts school district is accused of allegedly ignoring anti-Semitic bullying. Listen to this report. Massachusetts, the Concord Carlisle High School and Concord Middle School. According to the report, the alleged abuse happened to several Jewish students when students divided themselves into two teams. The teams were Team Auschwitz and Team Hamas. Team Auschwitz and Team Hamas during athletic games. Swastikas were drawn on school notebooks and on school property, and the use of anti-Semitic slurs such as kike, dirty Jew, and go back to the gas chamber happened allegedly at these American school systems. What would have happened in the media if this had happened to members of the African American community? If this had happened to members of the gay community? This should not be happening to any member of any minority in America. Every minority, I don't care who you are, should feel safe in an American school system. And yet somehow this level of anti-Semitism continues to go largely unchallenged. And then we are surprised when it bleeds over into college and universities that we've seen, and then it bleeds over into attacks on individuals in the physical world, like we saw in Boulder, Colorado, like we saw in Washington, D.C., where two Jewish young people were murdered in cold blood simply because they were Jewish. The University of California, on a positive note, has announced a ban on all BDS movements on campus. We celebrate this. BDS, if you're not familiar, is boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And the campus officials announced that BDS movements will be banned from universities or student governments, and they may not boycott any company based on their association with a particular country. And so this is a move in a positive direction. Is there room for debate and even strenuous disagreement in higher education? Of course there is. We believe and we welcome and we champion free speech. This is a necessary part of a robust democracy. But when free speech targets just one group of people simply because they are that group of people, then we've crossed the line from debating about issues, and now we are targeting ethnicities, and we are targeting people simply because of their national or ethnic identity. And that is never right. That is a dangerous slope, slippery slope toward racism that is something all of us should be standing against. Now, let me give you another bit of positive news, and this one blew my mind this week. This is incredible. This is from the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal has reported that 5 prominent sheikhs in Hebron, a Palestinian city in Judea and Samaria, these 5 sheikhs wish to create an autonomous region. This is amazing. They want to secede from what has been known as the Palestinian Authority, which has been an utter failure, a complete and total disaster, going back to the time of Yasser Arafat. And they want to create an autonomous region called the Emirate of Hebron. Now, Emirates, of course, the UAE, United Arab Emirates, there are various emirates throughout the Middle East. And these are clans, these are tribes that are headed by sheikhs. And so these 5 sheikhs together want to form the Emirate of Hebron, and they want to join the Abraham Accords. We're going back to whatever your view on President Trump. You have to look at the Abraham Accords. Every Middle Eastern scholar said that this was impossible. Every Middle Eastern scholar said that there was no way that there would be normalization, and yet it's happened. And now these 5 sheikhs want to create a united Emirate of Hebron and join the Abraham Accords and normalize their relationship with the Jewish state of Israel. Listen to this official communication from Sheikh Al-Jabari. He wrote this to Nir Barkat, and Nir Barkat is a friend of mine. I've met many times with Nir Barkat, former mayor of Jerusalem. He said, "We want cooperation with Israel. We want coexistence. The Emirate of Hebron will recognize the state of Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people. We want to recognize the state of Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people. And then the state of Israel shall recognize the Emirates of Hebron as the representative of the Arab residents in the Hebron district." This is a game changer. I read in a different report that there are approximately 800,000 Palestinians who would be a part of this emirate. That is a huge number. You're talking about an enormous number of the Palestinian community coming into normalizing their relationship with the state of Israel. This is extraordinary. So we're going to be following that as that unfolds. Now, this is another kind of unrelated issue, but an interesting issue for us to be aware of. The IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, announced that it would begin issuing draft summons to the 54,000 ultra-Orthodox men who are studying in yeshiva. This is a hugely controversial issue in Israel, that members of the ultra-Orthodox community do not serve in the IDF. And this is a complicated and hugely controversial issue, because for this ultra-Orthodox community, their belief system is that their call is to pray and to study Torah, and that in doing that, they're helping protect Israel spiritually. However, the rest of Israeli society says, yes, but it's our sons and daughters who are putting on the uniform and actually going to war, and it's not fair that your children should be exempted from this simply because they're involved in spiritual work. Now, the reason this becomes very difficult is that the Haredi community votes as a voting bloc. And so when Netanyahu or other leaders need to form a coalition government, the Haredi community might overall not be large, but it's large enough if they're voting as a bloc. In other words, if you're going to guarantee that you get 500,000 votes or 800,000 votes or whatever the number is, well, then that can tip the whole election. So though they are not massive in their numbers, the fact that they all vote as one bloc makes them a tipping point in many elections. Now, many say that if they come into the army, that this will challenge the voting bloc because now they're going to become more modern. They're going to become more integrated into Israeli society. The closest thing we would have, and it's not a good example, but the closest example we would have would be the Amish, right, in America, a very insulated community, a very closed community, and then how do we integrate them into greater overall society? So, this is one of the most contentious topics in Israel, and this recruitment drive could spark protests and could bring down Prime Minister Netanyahu's governing coalition, because two ultra-Orthodox parties are part of his coalition, which has a very tiny, it is holding by just a thread. So very, very interesting to see how that is going to unfold in the days ahead. And we'll be keeping an eye on that as all of this moves forward. We've seen Prime Minister Netanyahu's visit in Washington this week. We've seen the fact that this friendship between Netanyahu and Trump is extremely strong. And we've seen this alliance continuing to hold in really, really strong ways. We're continuing to see deaths within Israel, 5 Israeli soldiers killed and more than a dozen wounded just this week. It's tragic. 2 roadside bombs in northern Gaza, killing 5 Israeli soldiers. And our hearts go out to those families. And so indeed, we see that this violence, is continuing, even though there has been calls to a level of ceasefire. Now, finally, for this issue, this term globalize the Intifada. The New York City candidate for mayor, Mamdani, has repeatedly refused to condemn the slogan, globalize the Intifada. And he has said, well, it can mean different things to different people. I lived in Jerusalem during the Second Intifada. I remember being in my apartment and hearing one of the bus bombs go off and walking down and seeing the carnage from the Intifada. I don't know how you are confused about the term Intifada. I don't think people are confused by the term baptism. I don't think people are confused by the term Hajj to Mecca. Words mean and phrases mean what they mean. I don't think there's a place of confusion or interpretation about this. So let's not play word games. Things mean what they mean. By the way, this is one of the classic tactics from the Saul Alinsky playbook, right? The playbook of the far left, of the Marxists, is challenge language itself. Deconstruct language. Because then if you're deconstructing language, you can deconstruct the fabric of society itself. This is one of the classic playbooks. So things mean what they mean. The first Intifada was death. It was stabbings and suicide bombings and killing. The second Intifada, which I was physically there, literally the moment it broke out. It broke out in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount when huge boulders started being thrown over the Temple Mount down onto the heads of those who were praying at the Western Wall. I was standing there when it broke out, and it lasted for months and months and months with so many people killed. So we know what the first Intifada was. We know what the second Intifada was. So if you're going to now say globalize the Intifada, listen, folks, if you're going to have a standpoint, if you're going to have a viewpoint, if you're going to have a message in history, have the guts, the courage to call it what it is. You're calling for the death of Jews. That's what you're calling for. So don't sit there and whitewash it with your smile in your nice suit have the intellectual honesty to own your position. You're calling for the death of Jews, which, by the way, we just saw in Glastonbury in England when the rappers got up and shouted out, "Death, death to the IDF." Do you know how many of my friends serve in the IDF? Caring, thoughtful, amazing people who hate the fact that they have to put on uniforms month after month, week after week, year after year, and go into combat zones and defend their homeland. Stop with the demonizing. These are people. And I will not stand here on either side. I will not allow the demonization of Palestinians. There are peaceful Palestinians who have been caught up in the crosshairs of the demonic brainwashing of Hamas and Hezbollah, all of this backed by Iran and fueled monetarily by Qatar. But I will not allow the demonization of my Israeli brothers and sisters. So if you're going to say that you want to globalize the Intifada, then have the guts to say what you're saying. Yeah, we're calling for the killing of Jews. Because that's exactly what it leads to. You not denouncing that phrase gives that rapper in England the intellectual cover to stand up in front of tens of thousands of cheering young people who don't have a clue in the world what they're talking about and say, "Death, death to the IDF." And that leads, my friends, to that 82-year-old woman being set on fire in Boulder, Colorado, and those two precious young people walking out of a museum being shot down in cold blood. That's globalizing the Intifada. Own what you're saying you're owning. You're a Jew hater. You're calling for the death of Jews. So just say it so we know where we stand on this hour of history. I'll see you next episode on the Israel Frontline Update.